Welcome to Season 10 of the Parenting Aces Podcast, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this week my guests are hailing from Australia. It has been a bit of a challenge to find a time to get this thing recorded, but I am so thrilled to have with us on the pod this week Jay Deacon and Shayne Tabb. They are doing some great work down under with 10 and under players, the youngest tennis players in our system or in their system. And I'm so excited to have them share the work that they've been doing and kind of explain their approach to getting new players involved in tennis and introducing them to the game and getting them kind of onto the pathway of tennis development, junior tennis development. Before I bring the two gentlemen on, I want to just remind you, if you haven't already, we'd love for you to become a premium member of Parenting Aces. And we'd also love for you to go shopping on ParentingAces.com and take a look at some of our new logo merchandise. If you are a premium member, you get free shipping every day on our merch. So another bonus of joining us and continuing to support Parenting Aces in that way. So without further ado, let me bring Shayne and Jay online. I'm going to unmute them. I'm going to add them to the video. If you are listening to this on one of the podcast apps and you want to actually put faces and personalities to the voices, come on over to parentingaces.com and you'll be able to see the video version. It'll also be on our YouTube channel. Shayne and Jay, thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure to meet you both.
Thanks very much, Lisa.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
So you guys are like the gurus of red, orange, green tennis in Australia. Tell us a little bit about your program and how you got started working with the red, orange, green population of tennis players.
Would you like to start?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Tennis Australia adopted what we call the Hot Shots program over here for 10 under tennis, and that started in 2008. And that was our first introduction. We realized and recognized that elsewhere in the world it had been running for some time, in that in Europe it had been going for some 10, 20, even longer in Europe at that stage. So bringing it out to Australia was finally a transformational change in terms of the way we coached, the way we practiced, and the way we implemented and looked at tennis. So in 2008, we sort of adopted the methodology that was used by the rest of Europe and put our spin on it as well. And then we further explored the pedagogical methodology that best suited the environment. And we've been working in that space for a long, long time now.
So, Jay, let me just ask you, before y'all adopted the red, orange, green system, and, it's everybody does it a little bit differently, how were things being done in Australia?
I'd say we were using what we might conceptualize as a traditional pedagogy, where a coach would be delivering balls, standing beside a basket, feeding balls, doing a lot of drills and activities and games around the environment to try to produce players. And then the switch came and we adopted game-based. A theoretical paper came out, and it was in 1982, called Teaching Games for Understanding. And that was a pedagogy based around placing the athlete into a game situation and teaching them within the game. So that was a very linear approach in that you would teach one thing, then the next, and it was a series. And it didn't accommodate for the learner's needs, which is about piecing together and scaffolding the information. So one of the authors actually Thorpe came out to Australia in 2009, and for our Australian Sports Commission rewrote what the template was going to be. We called it the game sense approach, and it allowed for a flexibility to meet the needs of the individual athletes still in the game sense approach that we call it, in that we try to put them in game situations and teach within the game. And I guess that was the biggest shift for coaches, and it's continuing today. The coaches we're probably slow adopters on the whole, but we recognise that it's been successful elsewhere in the world, and now we're adopting it in Australia.
And Shayne, how long have you been involved? Have you been involved since the beginning as well?
I think we met 4 or 5 years ago, and I'd spent a pretty big stint in Europe, and came back to Australia and was thrown into the hotshot space. And I think once Jay and I met, we decided we were very similar to each other in what we wanted to do here. And over a cup of coffee, we created what we call a red, orange, green ball circuit tournament. So it's been fairly new for me in Australia, but I'm thinking, a little bit of what Europe was doing coming back into Australia. I think we've kind of formed a pretty strong friendship and an understanding with what we need in Australia.
So how did you both get involved with teaching the younger children as opposed to, the traditional high performance coaching or teaching like the recreational folks like myself?
Right.
Yeah.
I came from a performance background originally, having worked at Saddlebrook in the States. Harry Holtman was my godfather, so
Oh, wow.
a laydown was there that I was going to be involved in tennis in some way, shape or form. And so I spent considerable time in that space and was then employed by a school here on the Gold Coast, a private school that were looking to establish a tennis program. And then I was involved heavily in that space. So I went from performance and family business to the school environment and saw the opportunities that our Hot Shots program, the 10 and Under program, availed to us, that we could do a lot of things in that space and develop it. But I guess we both found holes in the competition structure in particular that didn't accommodate for what we wanted for our players. In that there was no defined pathway here in Australia, and I guess there still isn't, that we're trying to shape and shape the tournament side and competition side to meet the needs of the individuals.
So you mentioned pathway. Are there checkpoints or certain criteria that the children need to meet in order to move from red to orange to green to eventually yellow ball?
I think by supplying a match play pathway as a pinnacle point of tennis, then the coaching slides underneath it. And I think by having certain competencies for each of those colours rather than age brackets, it then allows the coach to transition those children a little bit clearer.
So we have a set of competencies for Tennis Australia in that we have 3 stages in red 1, red 2, red 3, orange 1, orange 2, and green. And each of those is delineated by a set of competencies. So to put it in layman's terms, I guess red 1 is about developing the rally, because the premise being that the rally should be the foundation of our game, which it is. And we teach within that. So developing the rally is the primary concern. Red 2, we would consider that they're able to maintain a rally with each other, not with a coach, but with each other of a significant amount, so 5 to 10, and be able to start exploring the court because the court size increases at that stage, and they're able to manipulate their opponent around the court to produce different results. And then red 3, it's at a stage where they can deliberately change direction. They can serve to a forehand or a backhand. So we're looking at a different set of competencies from what many other ITF nations actually produce, that we've made relative to their cognitive capacities. And then orange 1, orange 2, we're moved to the bigger court. So they once again explore space, that transitional piece to the net, as well as understanding center of possible returns and things like that. So each step, we increase the cognitive load on the athletes, and it is delineated in competencies that are available for all coaches and parents on the Tennis Australia website.
And so it's up to the coach to make the decision when a player is ready to move from red 1 to red 2, for example. It's not based on age. It's merely based on achieving those competencies that you've laid out.
That's correct. It's a competency-based learning system. So age isn't the definitive characteristic in terms of skill acquisition and development. We often fall into the trap of saying, oh, my child is 8 or my child is 10, but they've never participated in the sport before and they haven't thrown a tennis ball or thrown stones at things, so they don't have the requisite skills in each of the stages. So a competency-based system is the only way to go forward with that, to allow the athletes to develop properly.
And I think that match play space helps us define where that child should be. If we've got those set competencies for a red ball tournament, or that's what we're going to be following as coaches.
Yeah.
Right.
The interesting side is when we introduce so coaches have to sign off on the competencies of the child for our Red 3 tournament competition. So in order to match that, to ensure that you don't have this incredible discrepancy between the best players and the worst players, if they meet the competencies, they're going to be there or thereabouts. And so it was an awakening for a lot of coaches around the Gold Coast that, okay, well, this is the standard. So it formed a change in their processes as well, so that they identified the children as, all right, this child is Red 3. Oh, they're not up to that standard, they're Red 2, and so on and so on. So the competition was the driver of the coach mandating which section they'd be in. Same thing happened in France when they introduced orange ball tournaments. They had the highest sales in French history on orange balls the week after, because coaches were identifying, saying, okay, well, this is where the competition is, so we need to meet the requisite requirements of the competition that they're going to play in. So hence, orange balls went through the roof. And we found a similar sort of thing, that the competition structure has allowed for the proper placement of the child in terms of which level of competency they're in.
So since this is Parenting Aces, I have to ask you, do you do parent education in conjunction with the learning that the children are receiving on the court with the coaches?
I think with this product, it's allowed us to put lots of pieces with the product, and that is one of, if not the most important piece, which I will let Jay explain most of it, because he is the master of parent videos.
Yeah, so we put together, understanding that there were so many things commensurate with this tournament structure, that we wanted to enable parents to have a better understanding, to educate them in a way. And as a result, we put together a parenting presentation where we undertake a journey through a pedagogical journey, so the reasoning behind it, what it should look like on the court. And we also go into the psychological factors a lot. So I do a bit of lecturing at University of Queensland here in Australia in psychology and pedagogy, and we use tennis as a framework for that. And what we do with the parenting component is that we show the parents, this is what the child is going through. You're externalizing the pressure is just no good. We have Ash Barty's father, Rob Barty, who's a member of our board here in Queensland.
He's amazing.
He is amazing. And his comment to Ash, regardless of whether she would win or lose, was great effort, Ash. And that was it, because and it's pointing out to the parents that you're not the coach. In most cases, you're not the coach. And that disassociation from that role and saying, well, what do I need to be? I need to be the parent. I need to be there for support, encouragement, and sometimes consoling them. And I think parents lose their way, and they see it as living vicariously through the child, or they're just they always want the best. We, as parents, both of us, in fact, our sons play each other. We find that we don't say anything. We'll sit on the courts and encourage. Yep, great effort, fantastic job, love the way you played. Offer no coaching advice, because first and foremost, we're the fathers. And right. I think that's been blurred. That line has been blurred a lot. So bringing the parents and showing them. My favorite phrase is, what do you think your child would say if you behaved like that? Showing worst examples. And we bring up the Demir Dokic and a few others along the way.
Yeah.
The graphs, the Pierces of players whose parents have just gone off the rails, sadly. But if we want the kids to be in the sport for life, it's a team effort. And without the parents, it's not going to happen.
And right. by having this educational piece in the grassroots, we're providing a future. Not the parents' educational piece in the later part of their journey, but in the early part of their journey.
Well, and I was going to ask you, like, I mean, how important do you think that is to retention in the sport? Because, you know, I always say that if the governing bodies were all doing their jobs, Parenting Aces wouldn't exist, right? In my opinion, it's the governing bodies of every country's job to educate the parents as they're bringing players into the system and moving them through. A lot of parents, I grew up playing tennis, but I was at a complete loss when my son started competing because things were so different than when I was a kid, and I needed guidance. And I can only imagine a parent that didn't grow up in the sport or didn't grow up with sports at all. It's very confusing.
We have Tennis Australia. I'm working for Tennis Australia now in coach development, and we have a holistic view of athlete education. So that at the center of it all, it's a player-centered environment, and at the center is the player and what are their needs. And within that, you have your sports psych, your sports science, but the parents are equally as important in this role. If you look at it and think about it, the player at the center and the support network of the coach and the parents are the primary ones. And then you have the ancillary ones surrounding it. But without the parents, there's no going forward. There's opportunities for support, both financially, emotionally, and socially, don't exist. So we think that better people make better tennis players.
Agreed. So let's talk a little bit more about the parent education that you guys offer. You mentioned videos and so when you've got a child just starting, they're showing up for their first day with a new coach, it's the first time they're picking up a racket. Is there something for the parents at that first step, or does that come later?
At this stage, we don't have a generalized program across the country, but we are in the process of developing that so that each coach can have information for the parents to outline, because you can imagine a number of different private operators around the country. Here in Australia, we have 3,500 coach members, each operating in a different way. We'd like to be able to put forward an opportunity for those coaches to have some professional development or some education for the parents, and that'd be crucial, which would be a great thing to have, but that's up to the individual coaches at the moment. For the competition series circuit as we have it, we offer that as a generalized offering at each of the tournaments, just to initiate that conversation as well and develop the relationship between ourselves and the parents. Because in order to move forward, and we talk about concepts around positive youth development from Richard Lerner in competence, confidence, connection, and character, we wanted to not only develop the connections in between coach and parent and player, but also their character as well, about how they can give back in their responsibilities, and also their opportunities for leadership within that space.
I love that. So you keep mentioning your circuit. I want to really talk about the details of the competitive structure that you guys have created for the red, orange, green space, and talk about how the events look. How many days do they last? How many matches do the kids play? What type of scoring there is, and what type of draws you're using. I want all the details.
Fun part.
Yeah. The nitty gritty.
Yeah, great. So we should probably start with the three different events: the red, the orange, and the green. They run on a Sunday morning, and the idea is that at that age bracket, we like the tournament experience to be quite minimal as in time. So at least by 12:30, the family can still go out and have their lunch on a Sunday. So the idea is that we minimize the time and don't make it a long drawn out affair for their first tournament experience. And
so how many matches are they playing in that Sunday morning?
So we do a Monrad draw. So we get up to 32 players. So it could be up to 40.
Wait, a what draw? A what draw?
A compass draw or a Monrad.
Oh, compass draw. Okay.
Yes. And it means that every player receives 4 to 5 matches, which is usually a one set scenario, and abbreviated a bit more in red and orange. So for orange, we would run a fast four format, first to four. For
Okay.
red, we feel like that the score line for red probably needs to be more point orientated rather than the tennis coded score, 15, 30, so forth. So we keep it very minimal so that they understand that accumulation side of things. And for green, it would be
so it's just
a normal
1, 0, 2, 0, 3, like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they play a 4-game set, or?
So orange would go. So let me start from red. Red would be first to 16 points.
Okay.
2 point deficit to win.
Okay.
Orange would be fast four, first to 4, 3 or tiebreaker, and then green would be 1 set, first to 6, 5 or tiebreaker, and they receive 4 to 5 matches. So that the idea with the compass draw is that their last match is their most competitive match, because we're finding out where that level is, as in closeness together.
I love that
compass draw in that because of your position within the draw. Ultimately your best matches are towards the end because it's someone of closer standard when you're fighting out for the closer positions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And are there ranking points associated with this or anything like that, or they just show up, they play, and then it's over and they come back the next week?
So there's rating points, but there's also ranking points. So within a hidden agenda behind public eyes, there will be a ranking for red particularly, but for green or orange and green, we actually have a ranking as in an accumulation of points over an 8 tournament circuit, and the idea being that a certain amount of children will then represent their region to go and play against another region at the end of the year. So we will have representation for the Gold Coast from a grassroots level playing other regions in the same format as a let's say an end of the year Masters final, you could call it.
Mm-hmm. And so they earn their way through the system, hopefully earning their opportunity to play for their region against the other regions at the end of the circuit.
That's the goal at the end.
Yeah.
So the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is the representation. But one of probably the biggest and underlying things is that when we first initiated this, it wasn't about winning and losing, because if you look at the psychological components of what are the drivers, what are the motivators for the player, it's not about winning or losing. That's parentally driven.
Yeah.
So any of the psychological evaluations will show that the primary drivers are fun, competitive, social. So all these components we wanted to bring in, but we wanted to bring, as going back to the holistic development, we essentially attributed a few core values to the system. So the biggest prizes aren't for winning or losing. It's for our two components are sportsmanship and effort. So they're adjudicated by a supervisor who's on court. So the host club will provide supervisor for each of the courts, and they will determine, along with the children, as a rating for their opponent and for each of the students from the supervisor, what level of effort do they put in, or what level of sportsmanship. So by flipping it on its head, we have kids who are clapping shots, great stuff, great effort, helping each other out. So the collaboration and connection between the players is just outstanding. And so the biggest prizes are essentially for effort and sportsmanship, which ultimately is what we want going forward. No one remembers who the best 10 under was in your region 20 years down the track. But if we create a better person, they'll probably be a better tennis player. So once again, it comes back to that humanistic approach about let's develop the people first, and then when it's time, when their sampling period is over and they're into the investment stage, which is at 12 plus and older, then we look at the specialization and the investment. That's when the psychology changes and we can focus on higher levels of performance. But for this stage and their sampling stage, it's so important to send the right messages, and that's what we tried to put together.
And I think also with the final outcome being representation, team environment against children that you've been playing against all year as opponents, but now you come together to play together as a team. And I think at that age group level, that's a really good base to start with.
And are they playing singles and doubles, or just singles at this stage?
It's primarily singles for the fact that we can get the day done very quickly. But we've now decided to add another part to the circuit, which will be like a sign-on shootout doubles, which, they could sign on with a friend from another club if need be, and you just play a small tiebreaker. It would be done in 45 minutes, but again, it would be a fun environment event away from that singles.
Love that. Y'all have been doing this long enough now. I'm curious, have you seen any evidence that this approach with the youngest children is carrying over into the older age groups in terms of sportsmanship? And one of the things that we have big issues with here in the States is line calls, bad calls, and, I hate using the C word, but, because kids make mistakes. But I'm just wondering, because you guys have been using this humanistic approach and encouraging the kids to exhibit top-notch sportsmanship, is that becoming habit that carries over to the high performance and, the investment stage, as you call it? That's such a great word because it is an investment.
I suppose we're trying to create a very correct journey, and part of that journey is to learn, the right things to do at the beginning. I think, where would you go from there?
Yeah, we're establishing a great foundation, and we've seen that the kids who are transitioning from our tournament circuit now into higher levels of yellow play carry forth all the foundations that they developed many, many years ago. And I think that's a big part of it, because if you get the foundation right, the rest of the house will go up accordingly. And it's a firm foundation that we're building. They're great sports. They put in a great effort. The parents, we encourage the parents after they come off to, I'd say, great effort, or, all right, what are we going to do for lunch?
Yeah.
So not to ask we emphasize that the first question you ask is not, how did you go? Which is, and then also talk about the car ride home, so that if we can extract that from the parents' vernacular and how the way that they want to talk, and get back to parenting, it's a positive relationship that it builds between player and parent, but it serves as a positive model going forward. So we found that the kids now, and the parents as well, are supportive. Okay, all right, we've got tennis day, great. All right, what are we doing after tennis? And so tennis is now not everything revolving around it, but part of their lives. And the behavior characteristics of those children going forward are exemplary. And I see it in the talent development space where I work, is that you can spot the kids who've come through the Gold Coast tournament circuit, because they're so well behaved, well mannered. They're always happy to be there. It's not a grind, because they love the game, because they haven't been exposed to the parent climbing the fences and embarrassing them in front of their friends. And it happens. We know it happens everywhere around the world. And we've been successful and very lucky to have put a stop to all of that and encourage better parent behaviour. And as such, we have greater attention from the kids. We have greater numbers moving forward. So our green ball competition we took from another competition and into our format. And as a result, we have more players than they've ever had before. So I think that's indicative of the program that we've developed. And the success.
Have you had situations where you've had a child who is not exhibiting good sportsmanship? And if that comes up, who handles that?
Yeah, absolutely. On the day, we have a situation where a very small percentage of children can't deal with the pressure and might be coming off teary or other circumstances, throwing rackets. The tournament director, there's a supervisor per court, which are all worded up on these values. And we address the situation in a calm manner off the court. and then we bring the child back into the fold, and they have to play their next match. And over the experience of the day, their behaviour becomes better, and it's about approaching them in a manner that's correct, being very clear at the beginning, which we are when we present the tournament. It's about what we're going to be doing on the court as values, and we're rewarding that too on the day.
Are you getting any pushback from parents?
I think without putting questionnaires out there, we're just getting very good feedback, as in the new generation of style of tournaments coming through. Parents are very pleased with their children being a part of something that means something. And that feedback is coming straight back into word to word to us. And I feel that this next generation of players coming through, and parents too, is going to make our job easier from 12 plus.
For sure. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
It's a difference between that the threat, so in higher tournament levels, when you have a referee who's watching over, and it's almost like an operant conditioning. You've been bad, and someone telling them they've done a really bad job. You've been naughty or something like that. It's not a positive reinforcement that we want. We want the opportunities to have the learning as meaning making, so that they understand what's happened and how they can deal with it, and better if they're put in that situation again, how to better respond to it. So, and that's where the ability of the tournament directors, the supervisors on court, the education of the parents all come into it, because the child then, they're not chastised or abused for that, but they're taught that, it's probably not the best thing to happen. And how do we go about it? If you're in that situation again, what could you do differently? So it's a spin on that traditional, all right, this is the wrong thing to do. You've been very naughty. You're going to have 2 weeks off because of this. It's going against that, and coming in line with current psychology, in that, okay, we'll recognize your shortcomings, but how are we going to deal with this going forward, and how to improve on it?
And we feel that approach is a much better approach for a 10 and under child.
For sure.
And
parent.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you help the kids and the parents transition from your program, which feels very, use the words warm and fuzzy, but it's not warm and fuzzy in a pandering way, but warm and fuzzy in that you're trying to create a positive experience for the child and the parent coming into the sport. We know that as they go through the age groups and it becomes more competitive and more expensive and more time consuming, that it's going to be less warm and fuzzy. So how do you help the parents and the kids kind of adapt to that change as they're moving out of your system and into the older age groups? And, I know not every child that comes through your system is moving into high performance, but for the ones who do, how do you help them transition?
Probably the best part of it is that they're coming together as a group. So they're exiting our green competition, and they're still playing with the children with whom they've played for the last 5 years. So it's still that same environment, because the parents understand what their roles and responsibilities are, and the child understands. The only difference is that they're exposed to different environments. Sometimes can be a bit confronting, and we've had that before. But we hope that we develop the capacities of the child to be able to accommodate and deal with it, so that if they are put in an untoward situation, they recognise that, I've actually seen this before. That happened once at one of the tournaments. How is that handled? Well, it doesn't really affect me. And so their ability to problem solve, their coping mechanisms, knowing that there's no external pressure from the parents, in that the parents are going to be supportive. They're just there to play tennis. So that emphasis on the craziness that can happen, they can easily deal with that and put it aside. But as I said, the benefit of having it as a long-range program is that those exiting green and going on to other competitions, they're fine, because they're playing with other people with whom they've been playing for a long time, and they've formed those connections, and they're good people because of it.
And also, I think,
go ahead.
And also, we get, it's quite organic. What happens is that two players playing against each other in Greenville from different clubs who might be rivals venture into 11s and 12s, and they're actually buddies. So, this buddy up business and supporting each other at tournaments, this is, I really believe, is a really way forward, and it's happening organically from the early days.
But there's going to come a time where they're going to play somebody that didn't come through your system, right? Who doesn't have the benefit of those years of learning these behaviors and the proper way to comport themselves on court. The parents haven't learned. So, there's going to be a situation that they're going to have to face and figure out. I think it's just inevitable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we hope that parental guidance and also supervisor guidance within the tournament structure is enough to be able to deal with it. They understand what the rights and wrongs are and can hopefully cope with that situation should it arise.
So for the older age groups in Tennis Australia, do you still have a supervisor on each court, or how does that work?
Not
once they get into yellow ball.
Not at the next level, no. So it's up to the individual, but we hope that their ability to cope stands them in good stead going forward. But we also do parenting presentations in that talent development. So from the 10s and 12s onward, we actually offer parent present. In fact, there was one last weekend for talent development group. So we continue it, though we see the benefit in it, and we've continued that on throughout the next few levels. So we're hoping that this will shift the bias into a positive bias for better behaviour.
What are some of the obstacles that y'all have come up against?
Well, I think the first one was the competencies of the children going into these tournaments. I think the tournaments are what we would call a premier style tournament. They're not a beginner tournament. I think the bar was never raised high enough for the children to achieve what they could achieve. So by raising the competencies for each of those events, we then put an application out for the coaches to fill out to make sure that child was okay to play in that event, and it wouldn't be a situation where we thought they could serve underarm, but it's actually overarm. So on some of those instances, the communication gap wasn't quite there. We had children coming into the events that couldn't serve, and we had to adjust things, I suppose, so that the child could still enjoy the tournament. But as years have gone by now, we've got, everyone's got the right idea now of what this event is all about. So it's yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, it sounds like there's a lot of responsibility placed on the coach to accurately evaluate their players, understand the level of the player, and recommend the appropriate level tournament for them to enter so that it is a positive experience for everybody.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And that was probably our biggest challenge, because this program, when I was in the private sector as well, this was driven by coaches. We got together as a group of people who were like-minded, and we said, well, this is what we need. We came up with a format, but the rest of the coaches bought into it. And we said, all right, well, let's gear ourselves toward this. And I think that was the biggest difference. It wasn't mandated from above. This has come from below up.
Yeah.
And now, because of the success of it, it is the most successful tournament structure in our state and probably the country in terms of its growth. That now the governing bodies are latching onto it and saying, okay, well, this is a valid way to develop, and there are so many different layers to it that are actually beneficial for tennis and retaining tennis players in our sport for a lot longer.
Yeah.
But it was.
I mean, one of the biggest gripes here in the States is the cost of junior tennis and the cost of putting your children into tournaments and the travel involved and how many days it lasts, and you got to pay for the hotel and yada, yada. It sounds like you guys have really looked at the whole big picture and figured out a way to keep the cost down, keep the time commitment down for these young players so that they can really develop a love of tennis and a love of competing with and against their friends, rather than worrying about ratings and rankings and, spending tons of money before the age of 12. And, hopefully you're seeing less burnout among the kids as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's definitely the case. And it's funny that you say that in terms of, it's also the parents that are a good experience for the parents, because
Right.
a child feels that if a parent is coming along to watch me play tennis and be part of that, it must also be important to them, and that as a family unit. So the psychology has played a huge part in how we've gone about developing this. And if the parents show that it is not onerous by coming for 3-4 hours on a Sunday, knowing that, all right, we've got the rest of the day to ourselves,
Yeah.
and then form part of an important part of the family unit, as opposed to something that's onerous, that's going to be over 4 days. We're going to have to travel so many kilometers. At this stage, the reality is if we can get them playing tennis and understanding the game and enjoying it, they're not going to be the best tennis players at 12. They're not going to be the best tennis players. It won't be until they can commit to higher levels of training where the body is capable of doing them multiple hours a week. That's only the time when you'll see the tennis players excelling. So this stage here, particularly in the sampling stage as we define it as, it's so important to get everything right to make sure that as they leave this stage and go on to the next, they're in the best possible position for it. And by having the parents on board for this is such a huge part of it, and
Sure.
making meaning of it.
Well, and also I wanted to ask you, how does the tennis training outside of the Sunday competition, how has that changed to kind of marry what you're doing with the competitive structure and the development side?
So the competitive court is ITF standardization with orange ball measurements and net height. I think previously we really didn't have that in competition here consistently, and I also think in lessons, we could see coaches teaching orange ball children in full court courts without lines. So by having restrictions, or not restrictions, I suppose
Guidelines.
probably constraints is the right word. Yeah.
Yeah.
By putting these constraints forward, it then takes the onus onto the coach to train that environment to suit that match play environment. So we've definitely seen a big change in the way things are delivered away from the match play space.
And what about in terms of frequency of training?
Yeah, I think from my point of view as a private sector, we have children coming 2-3 times to squad lessons a week, knowing that they have a club match play space, which we do in the same manner in our club, and then going and playing once every 3 weeks into a regional structured competition.
So at this stage, we're still encouraging the exploration of a number of different sports, and encouraging it is the key, because those finding out, I might play a team sport, I might play an individual sport. What I do at the club, I might be playing a doubles with a mate of mine. So tennis in its format, more people play doubles than singles. So tennis in reality is actually a team sport, more so than a single sport. But coaches have changed the way they deliver, ensuring that the space is right, but also providing more match play opportunities. And that's what we've been trying to encourage, that they have an internal competition and an external competition. We have inter-club, intra-club. So there's a lot going on in that space in that.
But again, no rankings or ratings associated with it. It's purely self-satisfaction, working hard. I lost to that guy last week. I really want to beat him this week just to make myself feel, not because I'm going to earn ranking.
Yep, but I might get a few more points so that I represent my region.
That's right.
I'm Gold Coast representative at the end of this.
Yeah, but there's not one person holding the trophy up.
No.
I think the children also at that age bracket, they know where they are with each other. They know their own pecking order. They know they're still going to be friends after they come off the court, and that's what we want. We don't want a list of numbers and names up there. We want them to enjoy the journey, and then later on, if that's what they want, that this actual match play space provides different pathways. So as you spoke earlier about a performance pathway, children will find that pathway themselves. And then the recreational pathway might lie for other children who entered those events.
And you're not getting pressure from the parents to do rankings or ratings, and parents are okay with the way things are?
I think the lovely thing about these events is they don't, we've educated them not to be that way. So they're going to be probably better later on as well. So we're very lucky to have new parents coming in, not knowing much anyway. So by providing that system pretty early in the piece, it's a different mindset.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's brilliant. And it's the reason I wanted to have y'all on, because it's a very different mindset to what we have here in the States and what I've heard from some other places. But I love the whole notion of, you're not just playing for yourself, you're playing for your region, and, your buddies are, you're all a team. And even though you're competing against one another, you're representing your region. I think that's it's a healthy way to introduce the sport to kids and really getting them to buy into what makes tennis so great. It's not about a ranking. It's not about a rating. It's about being out there and having fun and competing and figuring things out and coming off the court and going to get ice cream after.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it should be.
Yeah. But sadly, you guys know it. Before you came about, it probably didn't look like that in Australia, and it doesn't look like that other places. I just think that, we're seeing around the world, well, in the last year and a half with COVID, we've seen a growth in tennis. But my concern is, how do we hang on to these people that are sampling tennis for the first time during COVID? How do we get them engaged and to stick with the sport? And to me, setting up a competitive structure like what you guys have done is a really great answer, even for adults, right?
Yeah. I think also, though, just setting something up in a grassroots level that has the bar raised quite high, so that as coaches we can teach the children to play to the level that we would like them to play. And it sets the foundation to create more underneath for the children that don't want to raise to that bar. There's no reason why the events below those events can be underarm serves in a recreational level.
Which we have that competition as well. So there is a feeder or more of an entry level competition circuit where it's more team based. There's doubles and singles. And that's a feeder for this competition, but it's also a different pathway for late entry. So we often speak with coaches who have the 10-year-old turning up to the courts or an 11-year-old. And the reality is a yellow ball's going to pass them by and bounce off into the back fence. They're not going to get a lot of satisfaction because rally length might be 2. And that's where the competency-based elements come into it. Well, why not play with the red ball? And we're trying to validate adult red ball play here as well as a format, because you don't have to move as much. So people with dodgy knees like me can actually get on a red court and still play and have a lot of enjoyment. Nick Kyrgios is one that spends a lot of time at the Australian Clay Court Championships. He was down there having some fun on red courts as well. So if we can validate that concept of red tennis is just for little kids, we need to dispel that myth, because it's tennis. It's tennis. The ball's being sent and received. It's projection and reception. And you can try to work tactically to improve your play, and it doesn't. The color of the ball, the size of the courts, and the net are just tools for implementing our game. And once we can get over that and the ego attached, I think we'll be in a better place.
Agreed, 100%. Guys, if people want to learn more about what you're doing in Australia or get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think.
I'll put my email down. It's jay.deacon, as in the church, DEACON, @tennis.com.au. Feel free to send me an email, and I'll get back to you with more information. There is some vision around as well. So some of our little red ballers and orange ballers at play, and what it looks like at a higher level.
That's right. Yeah. So there's a few things you can see. I think there's a web page on the Gold Coast that contains a little bit of information about those circuit events. We can get that to you. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And we'll have all that in the show notes on parentingaces.com for those of you who didn't get a chance to jot down Jay's email address. Anything else you'll want to share with us today while we've got you here?
Look, we're excited about what's happening down the track. Currently reviewing all tournament structures and competition structures here in our state, and trying to bring this as part of it will be hopefully a core element. And we just want to see more kids having a great experience while they're playing tennis. So that we went through a heyday in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I guess. But we'd like to see that back again, and with a lot of people enjoying our sport.
And I also think that age is, it's not really important with these type of events. We've actually changed the age brackets for the tournaments. We've suggested that green is 11 years instead of 10 years, and orange is 10 years and under, and red is 8. And it captures more of an audience from different ages that are actually more in line competently. So, and then it provides an older orange ball player to play a younger orange ball player, but their pathway might divide after those orange ball tournaments. So the audience is bigger. Obviously the entries are bigger volumes, and it takes away this age bracket thing.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, really my favorite thing about your whole system is the fact that it started with the coaches. And I think that's just brilliant, to get the buy-in from coaches first and to have them come together to really hash out the details of how you're going to implement this, and then how they're going to take it back to their individual students that they're working with and really build these core competencies, so that they can come to these events and have a positive experience. I think it's brilliant. And I commend you. I hope that you guys are going on the speaker circuit and telling everybody about this work that you're doing, and so that it's going to get implemented worldwide. I think it's really awesome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the accountability for the coach, I think, is a big part of that, because ultimately they're responsible not only to the child but to the parents as well, who are paying the bills. And if they're not doing the best possible job, and I guess the norm reference is the competition format, and without that, you don't get kids turning up at the first time and saying, "I want to be a recreational tennis player." They don't do that. So, they want to be the world's best. So it's our job as coaches to facilitate that, to ensure that happens. And if we don't know where the benchmark is, and if we don't set it high enough, our kids aren't going to live up to it.
Yeah. Love that. Well, guys, Shayne and Jay, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been really wonderful speaking with you and learning more about all the great work you're doing down in Australia. I hope to get down there and get to come see it live and in person sometime soon, if the stupid pandemic would go away so we can travel again. But thank you so much for taking the time. And to my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Parenting Aces.